Thanks very much, John. And I said I was the first UK teacher in iPhoneography because at that time I was the first one. I'm still teaching the course. It started last February, and I've done it 3 times now, and it's been really successful, really popular, and the college is going to run it again next year. So I'm still teaching it. I just was the first one at that time when it started. Anyway, thanks John for inviting me. Thanks to Getty for inviting me to speak today. Yeah, I've got feet in both the iPhoneography camp and in the big camera camp. I take professional photos with big cameras, but I'm also heavily involved in photography with mobile phones. The term iPhoneography seems to be the one that was used at the beginning, but it seems to be moving on now. People are realizing that you can use other devices, and it's a bit of a mess as to what exactly we're talking about, but I'm using that term tonight. And yeah, obviously I'm teaching a course in iPhoneography, so I've taken a lot of photos with my iPhone and am heavily into it. And when I first discovered it, I was completely wowed. I mean, the apps that are available, I don't know how many of you use iPhoneography. You take photos and have apps that you manipulate the photos with, but when I discovered it, I was completely wowed at the things you can do. And not only that, I was suddenly very addicted to the social aspect, Instagram, which is what I'm mainly going to be talking about today. And the social aspect really drives the genre. It means that you can do photography every minute of the day. You know, from the moment you get up, if you're walking to work, you can take a photo, you can process it, do creative stuff while you're sat on the train, and then post it up when you get there and start getting comments and reactions before you've even got to work. So it's really accelerated the process of doing photography. And it's got a lot of people hooked. There are 40 million people on Instagram now, and it has become a massive platform. And it's no wonder, with 40 million people on Instagram, and not only are there 40 million people, but from what I know of Instagrammers, a lot of people spend a lot of time on Instagram. So not only are there a lot of people, but there's a lot of people who actually devote a lot of time to Instagram. So with both those things, brands have started waking up to Instagram as a social media that they can really use. And there are some brands that have really embraced it. There's some car manufacturers, there's some clothes manufacturers, there's a few airlines. Desigual run a really vibrant account with lots of really bright pictures of parties, of events and clothes and launches and stuff. But some companies, Benetton in a similar industry, seem to be not quite sure how to use it. I looked on their account the other day, and they've got 2 photos, and they're stuck. They don't really know what to do next. But I sort of looked around a bit, and I think some of the subject matters that work really well with brands are, on the one hand, time sensitive, and on the other hand, and this may be stating the obvious, but they've got to be visually engaging. Obviously a photo should be visually engaging, but for a brand just to set up an Instagram account and then start taking photos of, I don't know, if it's a shoe manufacturer taking photos of shoes, it's not really gonna work. Instagram is a community, and if people don't like what they're seeing, they're not gonna bother following you. So those brands have got to look around and find ways, and some companies will be able to do it more easily than others, find ways of producing engaging photos. But if you take those 2 elements of an engaging visual element and something that is time sensitive, what really works well are events. So if companies can stage events, so I'm thinking of product launches, conferences, parties, that sort of thing works really well. And obviously some companies will be able to do that easier than others. If you are a shoe manufacturer, you're going to have to use your imagination to think up events. And well, of course, iPhoneography image quality isn't as good as DSLR images. The resolution's not as good. There aren't as many pixels, but that time sensitive aspect, getting those photos up there before the big camera photos get there, which usually take a day, gives it a massive advantage. If people are at an event, photos are being tagged, then the people at that event can instantly, even if they're not following the account, can instantly see the stream, and they feel engaged, they feel part of that event. People who aren't there can see what they're missing, and it provides a really good record to promote other events after the event. So yeah, that's the sort of thing I think will work well in terms of content. Now, in terms of distribution, in terms of how to get that content out there, companies, brands have, well, in my view, four options. The first one is to get, are we seeing my presentation, by the way? I can't see. Is it up there?
No. You have to advance it all.
Oh, right, okay. Okay, sorry. What have we got there now? Oh, yes, right. Okay, sorry, we've done that. Events. Corner shop, yeah, John mentioned corner shop, and this is an example of a brand, in this case a band, hiring someone, although they're not paying me, taking on someone to take photos for them, to be their official photographer. An example here was they went to the BBC, they did a session at the BBC, a live session. I took photos when they arrived at the BBC, posted them up immediately, so their fans, their followings knew to tune in later on. Took photos while they were setting up, photos while they were playing, and then photos afterwards when they were being interviewed by Lauren Laverne. So it really gave their followers on their account, something really interesting, something really engaging to look at, and it made them probably feel part of that day. So that's one way of going. And I gave them the photos and they posted them up under their own account. So I was sort of behind the scenes. A second option is to get a super user. And Instagram has been fairly instrumental in creating super users. And here I'm talking about people with maybe 50,000 or more followers, which I'm not a Twitter expert, but I think there are more super users on Instagram, and they're individuals rather than celebrities, than there are on Twitter. And I think there are a few reasons for that. People become super users on Instagram for four main reasons. One, they got there early. Instagram hasn't been around that long. Two, they are socially very active, so they'll be replying to comments, giving people feedback. Three, they take good photos. That does come into it. And four, they have been picked by Instagram to be on a suggested user list. Now, we don't know how Instagram pick their users, but when they do, their figures go flying through the roof. And it's sort of created a little bit of a problem for Instagram, because the Instagram community sort of prided itself on being a nice place where there wasn't any commercial interest. Instagram ostensibly had no commercial objective at the beginning, but suddenly these super users are beginning to try to monetize their followings, and they've put a lot of work in to build up their followings, and they take good photos. So that is what happens in an open marketplace. And some of them will tell their followings, hey, here are 5 photos from a shoe manufacturer. And it'll be like a commercial break in a television program. But others are perhaps not doing that and slipping them in as if they were product placement. So Instagram, we don't. I mean, it's something that Instagram has created. They created these super users, but it seems they're slightly ambivalent about the whole issue. The third way is to crowdsource. You invite a whole load of people, and there's a quite a big and active group in London, Instagrammers.com, who take iPhone photos together. We meet up and go places, and we were very kindly invited by the Rabbit agency to go to Gatwick, who are one of their clients, to go behind the scenes, take photos of stuff behind the scenes at Gatwick. And that way, Gatwick got probably 20 photographers posting 10, 20 photos of Gatwick, tagging them with Gatwick, and they got some nice exposure. They had less control over the quality, but it was more authentic than perhaps using a super user. And then there's the Red Bull approach. If you just organise something awesome, something amazing, even if you advertise it to Instagram users or not, people will come along. You make sure there's a tag there for people to tag their photos with, and they will take photos if there is something interesting, something awesome to look at. So yeah, that's the sort of content I think brands should be looking for, and it's various ways in which they can actually do it. But just to finish, yeah, I would say, as I said before, Instagram is a place that wasn't commercial, and brands have to be very careful now that they're looking to use it in a commercial way to not disaffect users. And Instagram, at the same time, has to be careful of its own branding, because if it is seen to be a place where people flood the market with ads, then they in turn will lose credibility themselves. So we're at an interesting point now, and it will be interesting to see where it goes next. And that is my thoughts on the matter. Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thanks to Getty for the invitation to speak this evening. I work for Microsoft Research, which has a small lab in Cambridge of about 150 researchers, and research is kind of an odd part of Microsoft. We sit half in academia and half in the corporate world, so we publish papers externally, for example, as well as try to impact product development internally. So I'm kind of, in terms of Microsoft's perspective, I'm not here at all delivering Microsoft's official line on anything. This is the perspective of an interaction designer working in a research lab with an interest from a design perspective and an academic perspective on the role of objects in people's lives. So I work as part of a multidisciplinary team in the lab. With our focus is partially on social science, so I work with psychologists and with sociologists. We do a lot of ethnographic work, so we go into people's homes, and most of our focus is on kind of domestic life and video, with them doing day-to-day things. And I work with developers and computer scientists building things, and there are a couple of us who are designers. And our focus is very much on domestic life. So my particular interest is on stuff in people's lives, why people keep things, why people throw some things away, and the meaning that things have in people's lives, particularly in terms of kind of their legacy and their past. So I'm interested, for example, in the way that families formulate a sense of history together through the creation of photo albums in their lives. And so for me, a lot of the issues this evening are about the transition, basically, from the physical to the digital of all the objects in people's lives, including photos, and what impact that might have on the way that family life is constituted and friendships are constituted, as well as on the way that people kind of view their past. So I was drawn into this space by the passing away of my grandfather in 2005, and he left behind a suitcase full of 200 or 300 physical photos. And the social life of this suitcase was basically going from house to house to house in our family, and each of us got this chance to kind of sit down with a suitcase, open the lid, and go through these sets of photos that had all been organized into little envelopes for different periods of time. And one interesting thing that really struck me about these photos was that actually the photos that my grandfather had chosen to preserve were from a period of life that I didn't really know about, from his career as a pilot in the RAF during the Second World War and then as a test pilot after that. And so they were a means for me to get insight into a period I didn't know about, and also understand from his perspective what was important to him, that although he'd avoided really talking much about the past with me, these were the sets of photos that he decided to kind of preserve. And so I think from a physical digital perspective, you know, there's a lot of contrasts here between the quality of physical things and the quality of digital things. These photos were kind of beautiful objects that had the, you know, the old classic white border around them that had aged beautifully. On the back of them, they basically had metadata. At some point, my grandfather had sat down with my mother when his eyesight was failing, and she'd written down what he could remember of who was in these photos. And so they have a beautiful kind of material quality of them, and it really struck me that actually, from a legacy perspective, my legacy of photography will be quite different. You know, I'm taking about 5,000 digital photos a year at the moment as an amateur. And I figured out that my daughter, who's 6.5 at the moment, will probably inherit about 200,000 digital photos from me if I carry on at that rate. You know, so there is this issue of kind of quantity that comes with digital things. That it's an amazing property of digital things that you can make a copy of a thing that's identical to the original and share it with other people. But digital things have a tendency to accrue in a way that's very different from physical things. We have a tendency to throw away physical things because we only have so much space in our house, but we have a tendency to keep a lot of digital things in our lives, and actually it's effort to throw digital things away. So in the past, a lot of my interest has been on the difference between that suitcase full of photos that my grandfather left behind and basically what people see every day on their PCs, which are folders full of icons of stuff. And of course, what's happened more recently is this transition from thinking of digital things being something that's local and that's kind of physically on a laptop or physically in your home somewhere, even though it's maybe hidden away in a folder somewhere, you know, on a PC under the desk in the office upstairs, to a world in which suddenly these digital things start to have a life of their own. So this is the same photo as I would see it locally as an iconic thing on my desktop, and as I now see it up on Flickr. And suddenly it started to get these properties and become part of this network. So suddenly it has these little blue things, these little links that start to connect it socially with other photos that I've taken, and then also other photos and other people that are kind of participants in this network. So suddenly actually the photo starts to matter maybe a little bit less than the set of photos and the relationships between set of photos and the relationships between my sets of photos and people and their sets. So you get these little links at the bottom that say how many views somebody's put on this thing and how many comments they've put on this thing. And so an interesting question for me is, you know, would it be interesting for me to have seen which of my grandfather's photos, if he'd ever put them up on Flickr, had been favorited the most? How would that change the way in which I think about his personal photos, because they've been through this process of socialization and becoming part of a network? Many of you probably know the work of Nicholas Felton. He's working now at Facebook. He releases an annual report every year called the Feltron Report that started as a kind of tongue-in-cheek pastiche of the corporate annual report. You know, in the first year, it had things in it. He basically was doing data analytics on his own life. I think it's called personal informatics. You know, where his corporate report for his own life that first year had things like the number of pizza slices he'd eaten that year, what his favorite restaurant was, all these kind of slightly inane, slightly too detailed observations about his own life. So it started out a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but in 2009 his father passed away, and his report for that year was about his father, and what he did was assemble everything that was representative of his father in terms of data, which includes photos, in order to try and get a picture of his father's life. And so his corporate report of that year, every spread is another decade of his father's life. And I think it's an important thing to think about in the same way as thinking about digital photos as being part of a network of people and other photos and other things, that they're actually part of a network of data now. We're not just talking about photos anymore. We're talking about the output of people's lives that create this kind of blob of data that's about where they've been, who they've seen, who they've contacted, what they've bought, and all these other kinds of things. And there are positives and negatives to that retention of data. But that data starts to tell as much of a story as photography might have done in the past. In the past, I might have had the odd kind of cinema ticket or something like that stuck into a photo album now. But data's sort of becoming a part of this creation of the narrative of people's lives and the narrative of the network of people that you spend time with. I think it's interesting to think about what the role is of actually photo taking in people's lives, setting aside kind of professional photography for a second. And we've kind of seen a shift from the point of photography being the freezing of time and the object of photography to photography being mostly about participation. And that when you have lots of people going to a gig and all taking photos on their cell phones at the same time, actually the value isn't in the subject. The value is in participating in the process of taking a photo. And in some ways, it's exactly like holding a Zippo lighter up and waving it in the air. What it actually is kind of a celebration of the participation in an event. And the photos, to some extent, don't have as much worth as they might have done in the past. So one of our interests at the moment is kind of on senses of possession. People who have things in their home have a very strong sense of ownership over those things, that they need looking after, that they need tending. And people have the same sense of ownership over digital things in their home too, on the hard drives of their office PC, that they get a reassurance that that stuff lives in a particular place and it's safe and they understand how to take care of it. And they wish they backed it up a bit more, but they have a strong sense of its almost its kind of materiality. And the shift online is really playing with people's sense of possession of their digital things. And partially that's just because they're negotiating on a day-to-day basis with social networks, and some of the issues of rights there are tough for people to kind of understand. Does this really belong to me anymore when I put it up on a network? But I think actually the participation of people through images online is loosening their sense of possession as well. So we've started talking, for example, to people who are literally saying that from the moment I take a photo now, I do not feel like it's mine. I don't feel that I own it. I always took it with the intention of sharing it, and it belongs now as much to my network of friends as it belongs to me. So there's this sense that people are actually saying, that the photo that I'm taking is no longer mine. It's immediately constituted as part of this network. And when I put it up on somewhere like Facebook, actually what I'm doing is making a kind of non-verbal agreement with my friends that A, I won't take it away, and B, it becomes part of the kind of conversation that we have day to day, and it's safe for them to comment on it, to tag it and do these other things with it. It becomes part of the pool of things that are shared with them. And I gave a talk a couple of months ago at the Cambridge Computer Science Laboratory, and one of the students in the audience said, well, what makes you think that possession will matter anymore in the future? And I think that's a really interesting question potentially for this audience, is this kind of loosening of the sense of ownership over photos of our own. That photography as a kind of a participatory activity, and an activity with an emphasis on kind of the social life of the image, means that any individual ownership over photos really starts to dissipate. That photos were always intended from the moment that the shutter was released to become social things, and they were never owned by the person who was actually pressing the button. Thanks very much.
Thanks, John. I wanted to sort of, oh no, the font has disappeared, which is really ugly. Sorry about that. To start off, probably just talking a little bit about what Richard's just been talking about, in that this is sort of excess of imagery around, and the way that we're sort of sharing, observing, and sort of experiencing life is really expressed a lot more now through photography. Okay. A short person. And until sort of fairly recently, commercial photography, I suppose, was the domain of a relative elite few who had access to the technology and the skill. But social web and technologies obviously totally revolutionised that old system. And I just want to talk a little bit about why I think that's happened and how it's affecting how brands are telling their stories now, basically. So as I've said, we've sort of been obsessed with documenting and sharing and consuming life through imagery, and that the social web, I suppose, is really sort of driven by our innate need to tell stories. And you just have to sort of cast your eye around the web store or online to see how many apps are around that focus on photography and imagery. Things like Instagram and Halftone or Path. They just allow us to tell stories in lots of different creative ways, and they allow us to tell our stories regardless of our sort of photographic talent. And as a result, we're really sort of creating and sharing sort of images in vast numbers, unlike we have ever before. So just sort of a statistic that I find kind of really amazing is that there's about 250 million pictures uploaded alone just to sort of social networks every day. So we're talking about massive volumes. And I suppose it's that sort of immediacy, like the other Richards have just spoken about this kind of idea that we can communicate our thoughts and feelings on something, or our likes and dislikes, sort of instantaneously, and we can kind of edit those visually and have them up on, sharing on our social network sites within kind of minutes. And I think that brands are sort of, waking sort of to the value of this social photography and are really starting to put imagery at the forefront of their sort of brand stories and brand experiences. I don't know if any of you know Goji, which is a recipe sharing site, which I suppose is sort of made up of lots of different food bloggers. But what's interesting about this site is that they've really put photography at the forefront of the experience, and you sort of navigate through the site using this really sort of delicious imagery as a kind of your pathway through the site, and you decide what you want to kind of make or eat based on this great imagery. And I think that's so much more compelling than looking through a list of text, ingredients or kind of recipe suggestions. So imagery is really sort of inspiring a lot of innovation around sort of new products, new ways of doing things, and I think that's really exciting. And I guess brands have sort of realised that this is quite a valuable currency, all of this sort of social photography that's around. So Flickr, I don't know if you know, but Getty Images work quite closely with Flickr now, and it's become quite a valuable resource for us. It's sort of like a massive bank full of images, a huge image bank, and it's crammed full of about 6 billion pictures, and admittedly they're not all brilliant, but there's a lot of really great stuff in there. It's very personal, very authentic, and it's allowing us, I suppose, to provide our customers with this really personal imagery, and not just on the kind of creative level, but it's also allowing us to provide it in the volumes that customers demand, because they do really kind of demand much bigger volumes than they have in the past. So we've got about sort of 500,000 pictures in the collection that are available to our customers to license, and it's taken about 60,000 photographers we have enrolled to create those pictures, so an average of about 8 pictures per person, which is kind of very few, but just in terms of the actual overall number, the size of the collection is massive compared to some of our more established traditional collections. And so in order to sort of deliver those volumes to our customers, we've had to sort of enlist the community's help in not only creating the content, but also to curate it and to help us surface the best of that content, because we just can't physically do that in-house anymore. We just don't have enough people and enough time. But of those 60,000 people, we've managed to identify about 100 photographers who have a really good eye, whose work we really value, and they help us to kind of find the really great content within Flickr. And what's really great about them is that they're globally based. So we have sort of photographers in 150 countries now, which is almost every country in the world, which is something that we've never been able to kind of lay claim to before. So the way that we're working with the community is really new. And I think that the way that brands are working with communities now is a definite new way of storytelling. So I think we're seeing, brands reaching out to their own communities a lot more. So this is just an example of a campaign that was run by Prudential in the US. I don't know if anyone has seen this, but it's called Day One Stories, and it's basically a campaign around retirement. So they encouraged people to photograph themselves on the first morning of their retirement and post a picture to the site, share their story with each other, and I guess it really makes you feel part of something, and it's a really shared experience. And I think what's interesting about this is the combination of user-generated or kind of amateur photography mixed in with much more kind of high production films and small documentaries. But when you go onto this site, it feels very personal, it feels very real and authentic. And I think part of the reason is because of the aesthetic of this kind of photography that's been created by just average people, real people. And one of my colleagues actually coined this term perfectly imperfect to try and describe how what this new aesthetic kind of looks like. Brands are sort of coming to us and actively seeking out the imperfection in imagery now. And there's a certain type of imagery that kind of meets the requirements of this aesthetic, I suppose, and it's often sort of associated with snapshots that you or I might take. You know, harsh crops, or it could be unusual angles, or maybe it's a bit out of focus, or, you know, the people in it are real and not models, obviously. And I think one of the biggest things about this kind of imagery is that it's they celebrate almost missed moments. So moments where we might have overlooked before, like for instance in this image with the girl's expression, you know, the kind of eyes going off in a crazy direction. We might have overlooked that before, but now that's actually become a really valuable asset because it's sort of a stamp of authenticity. And brands are sort of realizing that that's really powerful, and they want to get their hands on this kind of imagery. And as I said, we have customers coming to us who actively want to find this kind of picture. So because we've got all of these photographers based around the world now, amateurs, brands can come to us and specifically ask to work or kind of brief specific amateur photographers. So we've become kind of facilitators or intermediaries, I suppose, between big brands and average people. And that's a definite new way of working, and it's kind of opened up a whole new opportunity for brands, I suppose, to get access to this kind of photography. Now, what else did I want to say about that? Oh yes, just with regards to briefing people directly, we've also started a Twitter feed where we can actually brief out briefs to about 15,000 of our contributors, and they can respond within 24 hours and have pictures uploaded. So from a customer point of view, that's like a really new way of working, and it's really exciting because it means that they can have imagery from potentially all over the globe in answer to a brief that where in the past they may have had to brief out to one photographer, and obviously it takes a lot longer to get imagery back from that. So it's really exciting time for us to be able to provide that kind of imagery. I just want to kind of end, I suppose, in talking about how this aesthetic has become shorthand for authentic, you know, this sort of snapshot aesthetic. And it's obviously, you know, stylistically influencing professional photographers too. So, and sometimes it's a bit difficult to tell the difference between a real moment and a fabricated real moment. And I suppose that's just a testament to how influential this style is and how powerful it is. You know, we really connect with things that we believe to be real, and there's certain kind of visual pointers or cues that imply that this picture is an accident or it's a real moment. So brands are finding them really valuable. But I think because we're so consumed by documenting everything, by kind of constantly being aware about photographing a moment, it starts to diminish the moment a bit, and it'd be interesting, I think, just to see where that goes. Will there be a backlash against this kind of mimicry of real life, and where will that go? I think that brands are kind of embracing this aesthetic now, but I think it will be interesting to see how long that lasts, and whether or not we will start to question the authenticity, and whether we feel bad about commoditizing our personal lives. You know, people who are uploading pictures to Flickr are basically selling insights into their personal and private lives. And I think we're in kind of the early stages of that in terms of commoditizing it, but I think it will be interesting from our point of view and from a brand point of view to see how people feel about that in the future, and if it will change the way that brands need to kind of approach their storytelling. Thank you.
Thanks, and you know, again, thanks to Getty and to everyone else for the great talks and for letting me stand up here and chat to you guys. I'm last up, which is brilliant. So I want to start off with a little bit of audience participation. Who in the audience has brought with them today a dedicated camera? Okay, good. Who's bought a mobile phone? It's pretty obvious, and that pretty much mimics what everyone will say if you stop them in the high street. The old saying goes, the best camera's the one you've got with you, and pretty much everyone now carries a mobile phone that has a camera. The great thing about that is it's really changed the way that we take photos. It's changed the way we think about photos, because instead of taking a photo on, I don't know, a Kodak or Polaroid or a digital camera, going home, developing it or uploading it to a laptop and then putting it online somewhere, I can go, photo, within 30 seconds it's on the internet. It's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, it's on Flickr, it's somewhere. That's brilliant. That in itself is a revolution, as big as the revolution that happened when digital cameras first happened. That, in a way, it's bigger. It's bigger for brands, certainly, in my opinion, because the truth is that the title of this whole presentation is wrong. Brands don't really tell stories. Certainly, brands are not very good at telling stories. Nokia is a global brand with roughly 1 billion customers. We sell hundreds of millions of phones every single day all over the world, from Africa to India to Europe to North America, wherever. We sell on all 5 continents. We're in as many markets as McDonald's. What that means is that we can't tell enough stories about our brand. Our brand is purely the sum of the conversations that people have about us and the things people say and share about us and the imagery that they create and share. Not the imagery or the content that we create. That's not as important. So when you can take a photo of something, be it a poor experience that you have in retail, be it a screen grab of a frozen screen on a phone that sucks, be it something not working, something that's broken, something that you hate, be that for, you know, a picture of McDonald's putting up a crappy restaurant where there used to be a real local takeaway that you loved, be that a Tesco bulldozer flattening a green field that you used to play cricket in, be that anything, good or bad or ugly, and you can put that on Twitter, on Facebook, on Flickr, anywhere within seconds, and that can get picked up and shared all over the world. That completely changes the way people think about brands. And, you know, I've said it there, but it also changes the way people think about photos. It's estimated that 31 billion photos are taken a month, and 6 billion of those are uploaded to Facebook. That's like almost a quarter of all photos taken everywhere are on Facebook. That's pretty amazing. People, you know, they document their lives in real time. They expect great, genuine and relevant photography. The lovely lady from Getty up a moment ago was talking about this and talking about, you know, what's real and what isn't real. I took this photo the other day on my phone, just walking down Carnaby Street, and I looked round, it just started to rain. I just thought it was hilarious. There's like 4 or 5 guys all there, like taking photos. A lot of them were just taking photos of that puddle in front of them, taking photos of the raindrops. Look at me, I'm really arty. Brilliant. But people are documenting, you know, food porn. You know, who's seen food porn? It's brilliant. You know, people go to fancy restaurants and sit there. They order, you know, something looks lovely, and they just take a photo of it and just share it on Facebook. It's like, when people are doing that all the time, everywhere, it changes our relationship with photography as well. It changes our relationship with imagery. You know, great and relevant imagery is really, really, really expected. And that means that brands are expected to share and tell their stories in real time. And I'll give you a real example. Last October at Nokia World, we launched the Lumia 800, which is our first Windows phone. Within seconds of launching it, my colleague uploaded a twit pic of a photo, just of the phone in her hand like that, to the @Nokia Twitter account. That photo got over 30,000 views in 1 hour. That's more views than in the same period of time all the other content that we put out anywhere got. Because it was the first, it was instant, it was right there. And it was just a picture, and it's a beautiful looking phone. The lady in the front row there, who I believe works for Nokia, has got one. You know, it's great. But that means that all brands have to do that. All brands have to think about how they tell stories in real time. You know, waiting an hour, waiting 2 hours, waiting to the day after the event to get your professional DSLR photos, you know, developed and edited and uploaded, that isn't good enough. Like, because by that point, all those other thousands of people have put their photos up anyway. And you're just better off sharing their stuff. Will their stuff be good enough anyway? You know, and that's a really good point. Those photos, they have to be real. You know, not perfect, but real. And again, you know, that echoes a point made earlier. This isn't about those perfectly stylized magazine product shots. This is about the photos that real people take in real life every day. And if we're taking 31 billion photos a month, some of those are going to feature brands and some of those are going to be good. And then this is the other thing, they've got to be consistent. So if you're going to use real photography, you know, particularly with the proliferation of digital media and brands upping their spend on digital media, you know, that means that your photography has to work across a 4 or 5 inch smartphone screen, or maybe less, in the same way as it works across an 11 inch or 13 inch laptop or tablet screen, right up to a big out of home execution like a billboard. You know, how do you make your photography consistent across all of those mediums? I mean, Facebook, for example, the biggest source of photos in the world, it's nowhere near the highest quality. You know, they standard size all their photography. You know, they pix it down. I think it's 1028 by 720 or something like that. But they bring it all down to a very small size. But if people are producing all these billions of photos, aren't they an amazing resource? How can you use your consumers to tell your stories? And like I said, you know, brands like us, we can't create enough photos ourselves. We can't buy enough. We can't afford to just pay for every single photo we use. So on our social channels, on Facebook and Twitter, for example, we largely use photos that are produced by our bloggers. You know, guys who are sitting in this very room, you know, help us to source those photos from, you know, advocates, evangelists, people we work with, people who work for us. But also even in our ATL, even in, you know, our recent TV executions and our recent out-of-home executions, we've used crowdsourced photography from real people, not photos from, say, stock, or not photos that we've produced ourselves. And I think that's really important. If you want to use real photography, well, use real photography. It's not that difficult. And that means, you know, reusing that photography, making it bigger, making it amazing, making sure the people who create that photography are well rewarded for it. You know, it's not about, you know, there are certain rules here. If you're going to take a photo from someone's Flickr account or from someone, even if they've got Creative Commons license, it's still good practice to get in touch with them and go, by the way, do you mind if I put that on a billboard? Yeah, that's kind of obvious to me, but apparently it isn't to some brands, and there have been issues with that I've seen blow up in the social space. And the last point before I finish, you know, this photography is going to keep evolving. I'm holding a phone in my hands that's a Nokia phone with a 41 megapixel camera. That's going to be standard in the industry in 5 years. It's not always about the megapixels, but the quality of these phones is improving. They're never going to replace DSLRs. A famous Nokia executive said that a few years ago and was kind of laughed out of the room, and probably rightly so. But within a couple of years, you're all going to be carrying around in your pocket as standard phones that create such good photography and make idiots like me, who can't take a great photo for crap, able to take pretty much every photo that you just saw and better. That's pretty amazing. That's going to completely change the way that everybody sees and interacts with the world around them and sees and interacts with photography, and brands have to change with it. The one takeaway I'd ask you to take away from today is, you as a brand are never going to use your own photography, your own imagery to tell all your stories. If you try to, you will fail. You've got to embrace the fact that other people are going to create that content, other people are going to tell the stories. And what your job is to create a world and create experiences, events, places, and every bloody opportunity for them to create and share and tell those great experiences that they have with you as a brand. Thanks.
You know, will there be a backlash to brands commoditizing people's lives? You know, and the kind of, you know, models and people that brands are showing.
That is a big question, which I'm not necessarily sure I'm equipped to answer, but I can give you my personal view on it. I think it's interesting, specifically when we're talking about, say, people that are contributing pictures to Flickr, and those are the kind of authentic pictures that we're selling. And it's a real mix of photographer that is contributing pictures through Flickr, and they do range from professional photographers right through to mums at home photographing their children and, you know, family life. So I think it really depends on, in terms of the relationship between the photographer and the subject, you know, whether someone's being exploited or whether they know, you know, that their picture could potentially be used in some massive campaign and earn the photographer lots of money and they haven't been paid and all of that stuff. I mean, that's a conversation that obviously has to be had between the photographer and the subject. And I think just from anecdotally, like, we hear a lot of, there's a lot of activity on Flickr forums around sharing information about their work and what's selling and what isn't, and they often, photographers will get really excited if they make a really good sale, and will share that information with the rest of the community. And a lot of this time, when it is a sort of mother who's shot a picture of her children and it sells really well, and there's kind of a lot of celebration around it, and you always hear stories about how they kind of reward the children by taking them on a day trip or buying them some toys or whatever, I don't know, whatever. But so I think that it's still seen as kind of fun, and kind of, they're not necessarily creating set up moments. They are just documenting their daily lives, and they kind of happen to be making some money out of it as well. I think probably where, on the other extreme, I suppose, we do hear people say that that they do feel slightly outside of their lives because they're so focused on documenting it, because they have seen images that they've taken in the past selling well. They're so obsessed with documenting a moment, and they're thinking about, will this image sell? Does it have the qualities of another picture that I took that kind of sells well? Am I kind of thinking about the composition and things? And so they kind of step outside of the moment. And I think, we've heard some people saying that their partners, wives and husbands, are being like, put that camera down and just come and be involved in what's going on rather than being on the outside. And so I guess I'm not really answering the question directly, but what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that there's kind of two camps. Yes, I think brands will probably be affected by people who kind of draw back from not wanting to document their lives so closely, but then there's the other thing where professional people will start to try and emulate the kind of qualities of that type of photography, and I suppose that is kind of where a niche will be filled. But I think, like this gentleman said from Nokia, brands are handing back storytelling to the people that kind of follow them and their customers and things like that. And so it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling thing where we create the story, we're telling the story, and it's kind of an internal thing, and it's a community. And I think there's a lot of value in imagery around that, and I don't think that is necessarily sort of exploitative or kind of, yeah.
I can just say one thing. I mean, I've no idea. I'm not working in a big corporation, but I mean, I was sort of racking my brains as to why Facebook would have bought Instagram, and a lot of people couldn't really work it out, or pay so much for it. But one of the ideas I came up with was that the photos we take on Instagram, if you take loads of photos of cars, Facebook now is going to know that you like cars, so they can suddenly start popping up adverts about cars. So that's not metadata. It's not metadata, isn't it? But it is a way of people, businesses using those images to sell more stuff to you.
It's interesting because it feels like in graphic design there is a massive renaissance in information visualization, and there's a discussion going on in there just because of a lot of the open data movement that's happening online, where you have government bodies and also social networks releasing anonymous data. Means there's a lot more resources for using that for visual purposes. And so in the graphic design community, there's a lot of debate at the moment about info porn versus not info porn, about what it means to kind of create aesthetic experiences with data versus use data as a means of really kind of understanding a source and understanding people's behaviors and those kinds of things. But just anecdotally, my wife and I ran the British 10K at the weekend, which was sponsored by Nike Plus, and they we all had the kind of usual RFID transceivers on our shoes. But one thing they did was, if you went up to their Facebook page and you signed up for you liked their Facebook page, basically, your friends could add comments to their Facebook page on your behalf, and as you ran around, you'd cross little paths during the 10K, and those Facebook comments would come up on a screen in front of you, and it was kind of for us it was a dismal failure, because actually the messages only changed every 3 seconds, and they kept on repeating the same person's comments, and so by the time you'd gone past, you hadn't seen anything. But I think it was an interesting use of trying to kind of mix data and location and those kinds of things together, and they were doing a similar thing, having having photographers at different locations taking shots with Instagram and kind of, again, making those location specific. These were taken at Westminster Bridge at this point within the 10K. And I thought that was sort of interesting.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question actually. Like, how does data, all the data we collect about location, particularly become useful? I think there's going to be a really big movement over the next few years, and this is very much my personal opinion, not that of Nokia. There's going to be a big movement over the next few years into pulling all that data together into contextual kind of mapping technology, contextual kind of review and other use technology. So being able to say, I want to go there, and you can already do with Google Maps, you can zoom in and do Street View, but imagine that on a much bigger level, like inside the coffee shops, inside the buildings, inside different locations, being able to see much more, and be able to see much more of the. As we get to a point, Facebook still and Flickr, they're only a few years old. They're only 7, 8 years old or less. When we get to a point where those things are 15, 20 years old, then suddenly you've got 20 years of data. If those things are still around, if we're still, we're all going to still probably be using the internet and taking lots more photos. And when you start to look at that over that period of time and look at how things have changed, and look at how all of those, the amount of data you're going to have and the way you're going to be able to map change over time, urban decay, urban sprawl, all of those kind of major problems that the world faces in terms of the changing of population centres and changing economic migrations. That could be really, really interesting, and that could be really, really cool. There's going to be a hell of a lot of challenges though, because all of these things have different APIs, different different formats of the data. So there's definitely a lot of potential application that could be really cool across a whole host of areas, but there's definitely a lot of barriers, and it's not like I don't think we're going to see anything killer in the next 6-12 months, let's say.